Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to some of you who are on the farther side of the world from me. So thanks for taking the time to hop on today to check out our start of our next webinar series, our spring webinar series, and planning to do these for the next every other week for about 5 of them total. So if you hadn't signed up for the remainder of them, be sure to take advantage of those as well. A couple quick reminders as we get started. One of the benefits of jumping in here live with us today is that you have that Q&A panel in your controls. So encourage you to find that and make use of that. Jacob will be monitoring that information and answering questions as you go along. So whether that relates to specifically the questions that or the areas that we're talking about today, or if you have some questions related to other things that you just wanted to touch into as we go further along. So again, find that Q&A section in your controls and you can take advantage of that. So with that, we're going to jump and get started. And then just because there was a question as we were signing people up for this webinar, just to clarify that these webinars that we're going to be doing here in these over the next several weeks, each one of them will be unique, so it's not like you just get one and you got them all. It's they're all will be different. So watch out for the different things that we'll be covering. Today, the topic that we're going to jump into as we get started here is wall assemblies. For some of you who have been attending some of these different series that we've had over the last several months, you might remember back in December that we did a webinar that was related to wall assemblies. In fact, I'm going to, in the little chat window, you should see I just put into the chat area there. There's a link to the recording of that previous webinar on wall assemblies. So you may want to avail yourself of that. The things we're going to be talking about today are not really related to those so much, some little bit overlap, but mostly not. So things that you might find interesting in that webinar would be related to creating your own wall assembling templates, being able to handle additional sheathing when you don't even want the wall framing going that long, how to handle different kind of linking to the digitizer, treated bottom plates, and then using wall assemblies when you don't want any pre-cut studs. So those are just some of the topics that were touched on the previous webinar. So look for that in the chat window for that link that you can click on and attend that and catch the recording of that. But moving on from there, we're going to talk about a few other things related to wall assemblies today. And the first really is just sort of a user preference or a setting that for some of you may be helpful just for cleaning up your view. Over on this right-hand side of the wall assemblies, you can see my screen here. We've got a couple of fields over here related to upsize stud and upsize plate. We're not really going to go into those today as far as those features, and really it's just kind of acknowledging that there's parts of the country where those matter, but there's a lot of parts of the country where those don't matter. And if you don't ever really want to have to look at that stuff and have the extra fields plus extra drop-down fields and stuff over in the digitizer, if you're using walls over there, you can come up to tools, come to settings, and then down here near the bottom where you have the option to hide upsized studs and bottom plates, I can click the checkbox there. You'll notice that those fields will just go away. So to declutter your view, and for most of you, you can do that and just get a cleaner look overall. So with that said, moving on to talk a little bit about wall types. And that's kind of looking here. Now, if you're not familiar with wall assemblies, just a quick comment here, we are in a pack in the material list and you have a wall assembly here. The intention of a wall assembly is to be able to call one length of that wall and then drive a bunch of material as a result, depending on how that wall assembly has been configured. So wall types. So you can organize your wall into different types of walls that are listed here. So here in the input, if we click the drop down, you'll notice that there's about 7 different types of wall that you can call and organize your things into. And you'll notice then that I'm going to populate a little bit of data into these garage walls and then into the warm walls. And that would, for us, we would think of warm wall as that wall that divides the house and the garage. Some people don't choose not to break that out as a separate line item, but we do that as a way to just make it clear on the material list. So, but if you'll see, if I hit Control P, pull up the report here, come down to this main wall pack, I've got my garage, got my exterior, got my warm wall. Here's the sheathing, and then more warm wall, or the sheathing here, and then there's the interior studs and plates. Generally speaking, the way that the wall types are organized is if kind of from the outside going in, if you want to think of it like that. Garage comes first, and then you have exterior walls to the house, and you have the warm wall, so you're kind of moving further inside, and then you've got other things like interior walls. You've got your demising walls that will be in there. You've got your furring walls, and then ultimately parapet walls are kind of at the end, since they're just kind of usually on the top of the structure. So that's generally how they're organized, and it doesn't matter how many wall assemblies you have. So in this case, like if I had another interior wall here, in fact, if I had 3 more interior walls here, and say we had some footage on each of these. So I'm going to put, so I've got 3 interior walls. So notice if I hit Control P now, when I get to the report, like you would expect, I'm not going to end up with like 3 different line items of interior studs. All those interior studs are going to roll up together. However, that kind of shifts us to another feature. Well, so then to finish that thought, so depending on how you want to gather your different wall types, you know, as you build your wall templates, then assign that appropriate wall type here. Now, from there, though, even within a particular wall type, if you want to be able to distinguish something, that's where you can use this rename field. So if you had a bearing wall, for example, that was an interior bearing wall, and so you wanted to designate it as being like, you know, the bedroom interior bearing. And so you use this rename field to do that. Now, technically, it's still an interior wall. So as it gathers, as it's gathered into the material list, it will still be sorted that way. But by adding that designator, it's going to break it out separately on the material list. So if I was to look at that material list now, instead of just that single line item for my interior, I'm going to have now for the studs, I'm also going to have a bedroom interior bearing stud. So you can use this rename field here to break things out or to designate things more clearly on a material list for specific uses. I'm going to touch a little bit here on rake walls. So hopefully most of you are familiar how to do this, but I'm just to make sure that people are aware that you can do this. If you have a part of a building, so for example, if you're looking like at a part of a building that looks like this, like this garage here, you've got a gable end, and say that is going to be all framed up, even one of 2 ways. Either it's going to be framed up as an entire unit, all the way up as one big tall studs and everything else, or perhaps you're going to have a flat wall down below, and then you're going to stick build in just like that gable end as a different unit, but it's still going to be framed in. So you can accomplish both of those. So I'm going to create another garage wall here. Now I've got a garage wall here, and so instead of it being flat, you'll see if I come over here to where it says flat, I can click the drop down. I have the option to either make it a single slope, so if it was just pitched one direction, or if I wanted it to be double sloped, and that's what I'm going to use, the double slope rake. You'll notice I get some additional fields here. So what I'm going to fill in here now is the left height, what the pitch of the left side of the wall is, and then the right height, meaning the starting height, and then what the pitch of that side is. So in this case, since this is going to be a garage wall, I'll say, well, it's going to start at 9 feet. It's going to have like an 812 pitch on that side. The right side also starts at 9 feet and has an 812 pitch on it. And the overall length, including, since it's going to be sheathed, I'll put the entry in both, so it's going to be like a 30-foot wall. And now, again, if you're not familiar with this feature, again, hopefully you are, but maybe you aren't. Up here, you have the ability to view a wall. So this is maybe less interesting for a flat wall, but when you come to a double slope rake wall, I can click the view button, and that's going to pull the wall viewer up, and I can actually get a look at it to see how is this wall being framed out. So each of these studs here is being calculated to build out that material list for what might be needed with that wall. So you can see in the middle there, we've got some taller, 14, 16-foot studs in order to handle that case. Now, it also will cover cases of different pitches, for example. So like on the right side, let's say like the right pitch actually was only going to be 412. And so it would handle a case like that. And again, going to do the right thing based on the entries that you made. It could also handle different wall heights. Let's say like the the right height was actually only 4 feet. And now we're getting to a really interesting looking wall here. But now we've got this. Again, it's going to handle that for you, calculate out those studs based on the type of structure and the things that you have got going there. So that's how you would handle rake walls. There's more things that we could talk about there, but it gives you kind of a sense of the opportunities there. And then of course, instead of a double slope, you could just have a single slope rake as well. One quick comment for those of you who are experienced and have done this, but I'll just make a passing comment, is that if you're going to be using the double slope rake or the single slope rake wall, the way that functionality is built, it's really intended only for one wall at a time. So if you had 2 walls like that, that essentially that looked like this, one end of the building was like this, and then the other end was as well, you would need to actually draw those as independent walls to calculate that out properly. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a wall that's much too big. So now we're going to shift on to, I'm just looking at my list here. So that talking more about sheathing, there's several sheathing opportunities here when it comes to wall assemblies. So there's actually some pretty sophisticated tools that are available. So in order to understand that, I'm going to come back up here to this flat wall. You can see here I'm going to have a 10-foot garage wall. And if I pull this into the wall viewer, again, not terribly exciting, but it does help us see the sheathing a little bit better. So it looks like the way that this template's been set up is that I'm going to get 8-foot sheets that come up, and then I'm going to get a panel break there. And so then I'm going to get additional sheathing that's filled in up above with that. So if I expand the wall assembly here and just look at the controls, you can see here that the default layout is 8. So it's just using 8-foot panels. Now let's say that I actually wanted it to use 10-foot panels. So I'm going to come over here to the layout so the default's driving from the profile, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if I come to the default layout, I'm going to say, instead of it being 8, I want it to be 10-foot sheets, so 10-foot panels. So if I look at the wall viewer again, notice that panel break is gone. It knows that the wall is 10 feet high, and so it's going to use the 10-foot panels. We can do other things with this as well. Let's say that this wall height is actually even tall, like it's maybe even, a really super tall wall, 18 feet. We could do things like, well, hey, we want the first row to be 8 foot as normal, and then after that, we want 8 foot to be to use 8-foot panels, but lay them horizontally. And then after that, we want another row of 8-foot arranged vertically. Now, why you'd want to do that in particular, I don't know, but just to show you, now if I pull up the wall viewer, here we've got an 18-foot wall. First row goes in as a horizontal or a vertically installed 8-foot panel, then goes an 8-foot horizontal, then goes an 8-foot vertical again, and trimming as needed. Similar concept if I wanted to make this 10, I could have this 10 first and have that arranged that way. So you can build those things out to do the different things that you want to do. If you wanted, and then the final example, if you just wanted 8-foot horizontal everywhere like that, then it's going to be building it out that way. So lots of flexibility. Now to show you back over in the profile where that's coming from, just jump over the profile. Here is the wall assemblies, and this is where you might be tempted to look, but this just contains the wall assembly templates. But over here in the wall panel tab, this wall panel relates to how the wall assemblies use panel. So here you can see, here's the layout options, and you can actually range not only to have one particular style of layout to use, you can actually say to have different behavior for different heights of wall. So a great example or use case for this would be if you tend to use 8-foot sheets for 8-foot walls and 9-foot sheet for 9-foot walls, and then 10-foot sheets for 10-foot walls, you could say, well, okay, I want to have it arranged that way. So 8s for 8s, up to 9 if we go to 9s, up to 10s we go to 10s, and it's going to start doing those things for you. And then if you get above 10, it goes back to that 8-foot layout. And then all those other operations that I was showing before of 8H or things like that, where you can arrange things horizontal, all of that is possible to do that. So then with the concept of panel and how that's laid out on the wall, let's go back to the wall assembly. Another control that you have within a wall assembly is to have top and bottom lap. I'm going to set this back to just a more reasonable height, like say, even just an 8-foot high wall. So our wall looks like this. We've got, since it's arranged horizontally, we've got that. I'm going to take that off now, actually. And so now we look at the wall viewer. We just got a standard 8-foot wall, got 8-foot panel, and that's where we're going with that. So now let's say that I want to add a bottom lap to that. So like I wanted this to actually lap down below. It's like to say cover the floor system below it. So I could say, hey, I want to have a 1-foot bottom lap on this. And so now I can look at the wall viewer and notice that even though my wall framing's up here, I've got an additional 1 foot that's being accounted for with that. Now notice the layout here. Let's see here. Come to the plus button. So you can see down here, I'm getting 9-foot sheets. And the reason for that is that we said over here that if we were between 8 and 9 feet, and now, so this isn't a statement about, and this is a good thing to clarify, is that this isn't really just a statement about the wall height. In fact, it's not really a statement about the wall height. It's a statement about the sheathing envelope, as it says right here. So if you expand the sheathing requirements for a wall by adding top lap and bottom lap, then that's going to extend the sheathing envelope. And so it's going to choose different panel accordingly. So this could all still be 8s as well if you wanted it to be, but just showing you if you use 9s and you wanted a 9 to lap over the wall below or the floor below, then you could have it do that as well and get that behavior. So we've got bottom lap, we've got top lap. One other interesting thing you can do with the lap, here's to open up some other opportunities for some of you guys, would be if you have a case where it's like you need to be able to call sheathing on a wall, but the first 4 feet needs to be a different type of sheathing. So there's a couple of features you could do to accomplish that. First would be to create a negative bottom lap for your standard primary sheathing. So I've got my zip system right here, and I say I want this to be a negative bottom lap. So notice what that does, negative 4 feet, is if I look at my wall viewer, I actually don't have any sheathing here on the lower part of this wall. So now I've got just this, from there on up, if it was a 9-foot wall or 10-foot wall, then it's going to do that. So in fact, if we were to change this to this height to say be 10 feet, now if I would look at this, now I'm going to get that kind of behavior. So then to leverage that further, what I could do is I could say, okay, now I also want to be able to call additional sheathing. Now this is where you can, another dimension of wall assemblies is you have 4 layers of sheathing that you actually can leverage and use when you call a wall assembly. The primary sheathing is what's checked by default. It's going to run off of basically what's entered here. You can have these other 3 work independently, or you can check this box here to have it follow along with whatever's set up there. So if I check this box here, notice that it's automatically going to fill this in. These boxes could be set up in your template file or in your wall assembly template, so that as you use the walls and create new ones there, it's automatically just done for you. But I could come here and let's say that instead of this being a zip system, I want this to be like a CDX and I want it to be treated. Okay, so now I've got this. And so now what I need to do with this, if I want this to calculate right, is really I just want to get that first row in. I'm going to create a negative top lap of 6, right? Because I'm coming down from the top of 10 feet and I want it to only show on the bottom 4 feet. Now, we're not going to visualize this over here because we only visualize the primary sheathing. But again, you get the concept is now, as far as how the wall is being calculated, is calculating enough exterior treated sheathing to go across that bottom layer right there. So that's, I know in some ways it's kind of a nuance that some of you may run into, maybe not many of you, but even as I talk through some of those things, maybe you have a different case, a different scenario, or different circumstances why it is that you'd want to use that. Or if you wanted to put a different type of sheathing on the outside, maybe you have OSB underneath, and then like and then on top of the very primary sheathing, maybe you have some hardy panel that you want to throw on there instead. Okay, so that's different options. And I know we're going a little bit long here. Try to wrap it up here because I know everybody's busy and has things to get on to, but a couple final things here just to give you ideas of what you can do with wall assemblies. One that comes up fairly often for some of you would be walls that have offset studs from each other. So the wall is calling for 2x6 plates, for example, and then the studs are 2x4, but they're offset to either side of that 2x6 plate, like for soundproofing or whatever. So how can you call a wall like that? So I'm actually going to come here and I'm going to just make a copy of my exterior wall, my 6-inch, and I'm going to come into it and I'm going to say, well, I'm going to change my studs to be 2x4 instead. And the other thing I'm going to change about it in the controls is, since those studs are going to be 16 inches on center on each side of the wall, so therefore they're really kind of 8 inches on center, I'll jump this back to 8 inches on center. And now I can call this wall out as, say 40 feet of exterior wall, and I'm going to get 2x4 studs that are going to calculate out. And if I look at the wall viewer, it's going to show me even. See, I'm getting it, doesn't actually stagger them, but you're getting studs that look like this, only covering part of the plate. So those can move to either side of the wall. So you could adjust the on-center spacing to essentially double, if you want to think of it that way, the studs accordingly, and then get that additional material that you might need and set the exterior studs to be the 2x4s instead of 2x6, or if it's 2x6 instead of 2x8, or whatever the case may be. And last comment here, I think, well, no, couple things as we finish. One is that as you create wall assembly templates, so all the things or nearly all the things I just showed you would be things that you could build into your wall assembly templates. Again, see that other webinar that we referenced earlier about more specifically just building those templates. But these different variables that I'm showing you, a lot of them you could actually already put into a wall assembly template so that they're teed up, ready to use in a job instead of like having to rebuild them every single time. But another dimension would be, in the case of like this double slope rake wall that we built earlier, let's say that instead of it being a tall wall to begin with, it was just something that looked like this. It's just like starting at 0 and building up. And maybe in your case, for something like this, the way that it tends to work out, especially like in a stick frame roof area or something, you actually don't call a bottom plate, perhaps, just kind of making this up, and you only have one top plate. So you could actually build a wall assembly that was already teed up this way, that you could come here and say, well, I don't have a very top plate, and so I'll get rid of that. I don't have a bottom plate, so I'll get rid of that. And so as you remove different parts and pieces of a wall assembly, that means that they actually will not be calculated. They're not going to be sent, but they're actually not even going to be calculated into the overall values. So as far as it figures stud heights and things like that, it sees whether or not you have 2 bottom plates, 1 bottom plate. If that bottom plate is a 4x4 or a 2x4, it's calculating all those things into it. So now by making those changes here, and I look here, you can see that this wall assembly now doesn't have a bottom plate on it, only has a single top. You're going to get the material that you're after. So again, use different parts and pieces of the wall assembly to ultimately get to the material you want to ship. Last thing as we wrap up here is just different controls. Hopefully, and this relates to a whole separate topic, which is driving out of and working out of the material list over here, as opposed to just working in the plan tab. That's a whole nother discussion, but again, I hope that you're aware of that capability, and it really adds lots of value if you can do it. But if you are already used to that, while you're in this material list, 3 commands that are helpful as you work with wall assemblies. You can get to them from the right-click menu, but learning the shortcut keys can be really helpful. First is to duplicate the application. So if I just wanted another 6-inch garage wall, even though this has a bunch of entries and stuff in it, but I just want the garage wall, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-D, or duplicate application. Shortcuts right there. Control-Shift-D. That's going to give me just another plain Jane ordinary garage wall. No, nothing extra entered into it. On the other hand, if I wanted to copy some of the settings that I had made with it, I'm going to go ahead and copy the wall assembly using Control-E, or right here. So if I select it, hit Control-E, now I actually get just a replica of it, but notice none of the entries are here. So it's kind of like, yeah, I want another flavor of that, but then I want to tweak it or adjust it. And then finally, you have the option to actually just flat out copy a wall assembly in its entirety. So copy wall assembly and the input. So if I do that, you'll notice I'm going to get a whole nother exact copy of that wall assembly with all the inputs, and it's basically essentially going to double that material in my material list in the output. So be aware of those different commands, especially the shortcut keys as you're starting to work in the list more and more. It just can make you that much more efficient, just be able to move through those quickly. So that's kind of the quick run through of another angle on wall assemblies. Hopefully some of those things were helpful to you. We'll leave the Q&A section here open longer to see, you can ask any further questions. We'll still answer some of those, so feel free to avail yourself of that. And then be watching out for that next webinar in a couple weeks. Just looking forward to showing you more things that can help make you guys more efficient in the work that you're doing. Appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Have a good afternoon.